Welcome, everyone, to another episode of IT Visionaries. And today we have a very fascinating guest, or a fascinating subject for sure. He is the co-creator of CryptoKitties and the CTO and lead architect for Dapper Labs, Shirley. Dieter, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today, Albert.
All right. I am fascinated, absolutely fascinated by the world of NFTs. I am a noob at best in this industry or this technology. But for our audience who's not familiar or just hasn't been reading up on it, tell us exactly what is Dapper Labs and what do you guys do?
Yeah, I mean, don't feel bad being a noob. I think the industry is a noob. So I think it goes back to 2017 at the absolute latest for NFTs. So I think it's relatively early days. Thanks so much for having me here. This has been a lot of fun. Just a little bit about us. The story of Dapper Labs, you really have to go all the way back to Axiom Zen. Axiom Zen is sort of an innovation studio. Basically, the idea was that it's a startup that builds startups. And by 2017, we'd actually rolled out two other companies, Roughtific Vehicle Management Service and ZenHub, which is a project management tool that fits right into GitHub. And so in 2017, we wanted to build something in the blockchain space, and we decided to focus on a consumer angle. It seemed like it was an aspect to blockchains that hadn't really been explored that much. And we decided to make a fun little cat game. We figured people on the internet love cats, and what could be more internet than the blockchain? So we launched that at the end of 2017, and within a couple of weeks of launching, we brought down the whole Ethereum network. It was virtually unusable it was virtually unusable for a couple of weeks because we brought in just a whole slew of new users, and something like 40% of CryptoKitties users had never touched crypto before, and so we really knew we were onto something. So first part of 2018, we spun it out into Dapper Labs. We took all the IP, most of the staff, and did a fundraising round led by Andreessen Horowitz and Union Square Ventures. And we built Dapper Labs. And it was really apparent to us, we learned sort of three big lessons from CryptoKitties, and we built three products that addressed each of those lessons, right? So the first lesson was that people care about this stuff, that if you build something that appeals to a consumer audience, they'll come in. They want digital collectibles. They love this idea of having something that is real in the sense that they own it. It's they can sell it. It's independent. They can keep it. The company can't take it from them. It's not just sort of leased to them. But it a lot of people don't have really a financial side to them. And so something that just regular folks can understand and taps into their fandom. So we started working with NBA, and that of course became NBA TopShot. Another big lesson we learned from CryptoKitties is just getting into this stuff is hard. And you have to go and you have to create your MetaMask account and write down your 12 secret words that no one explains to you what they mean. Only that if you lose them, terrible things will happen to you. And so we built Dapper Wallet, which is, in my opinion, hands down the best consumer onboarding experience for crypto. People come in with nothing but an email address and a credit card, and they can get started right away. And so they can play with it before they have to understand it. And with CryptoKitties and almost every other experience, you kind of have to understand it before you can interact with it. And I think that just turns a lot of people off. And then, of course, the third thing we learned was that Ethereum just can't handle this kind of scale. And so we ended up, we did a ton of research on other blockchains, and we ended up deciding that we really needed to build our own, and that became Flow. And so, those are the three pillars of our company. Each of those products are doing very well, and we're really excited to see how each of those is going to grow.
I think I own $3 of Flow from Coinbase. It was when they ask you to learn about new blockchains, like, oh, okay, I'll learn about it. And so I think I'm a proud owner of $3 worth of Flow. But who knows? Maybe by the end of the conversation, I'm just going to drop some more on it. Let's take people back to that moment in case they're not aware of what happened. So CryptoKitties, you already mentioned, was the first game that leveraged, at the time, the Ethereum network. And I remember reading articles that people were essentially spending large sums of money or an inordinate amount of time, whatever you want to call it, to buy, purchase, trade, exchange these digital kittens. And I thought to myself, like, this reminds me of, and you can correct me, of course, I don't know if I'm right. This reminds me of that craze that occurred many years ago, like Tamagotchi, like the digital pets that were in these like handheld things. Like, I didn't understand that then too. Kids wanted them. They tried to make them unique and collectible. Like, you could raise your digital pet. It was a little fob. It had like a black and white screen. I know that's not completely related, but to me, it was like the digital pet. Like, why would I want a digital pet? Like, I don't understand. But then I thought to myself, I don't need to understand this stuff. As long as somebody wants it, that's what makes sense. Like, if people want things, I'd love for you to explain, how did you guys stumble upon this whole idea of CryptoKitties? Explain to our audience what it exactly was, and kind of give us an idea of like, what were your expectations of building it? And then, it was very rapid ascension, right? Where you like, what were you guys taken aback? Like, oh, this is just an experiment. Like, it's gotten wild. I'd love for you to explain how this all kind of began.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, the initial idea was cats on a blockchain. Like, it was literally as simple as that. And sort of the question is how do we, what makes that interesting? What makes that fun, right? And there were two threads we were pulling on there. One was just the basic collectible aspect of it. We figured that, some people just like to collect stuff, and, CryptoKitties, it was, what would now be called generative art. There was an algorithm for combining the different genetic traits for these cats. Every cat has its own genome. It's completely unique. As far as I know, no two cats have the same genome. And then, in the real world, right, your genome expresses itself in your phenotype and exactly how the cats look. And so all the different cats, they all look very different. And you can probably find, all sorts of different combinations. And then the game side of it was like creating those combinations, and finding those combinations and saying, oh man, it would look super cool if these super surprised eyes were on a cat that had antlers, so it looks like it's surprised that it itself has antlers, right? And so there was these wacky combinations. And so, some of the cats are just like, kind of derpy looking. A few of them are even kind of boring, but like some of the combinations are just like amazing when you see them. And in a sense, it's like the players themselves can create those moments. Yes, we sort of created the paints, right? We created the different pieces of the cats, but in a sense, our players were the artists that were combining those things into what they wanted to. And so we saw a bunch of different personas. We saw people who saw it completely as a puzzle. There's one guy who goes by the name Kaigani online, and he took the genome and he mapped it out, and he reverse engineered the algorithm we used to combine the genes between cats. And he bought a few cats, but he was never into it. He wasn't a collector. He didn't want to do the breeding thing, but to him, it was an interesting puzzle just to figure out what the math was behind it all. There were other people who almost treated it like a business, and would go in and like have a very regimented way of how they breed the cats to try and create combinations that they thought would be popular. But mostly it was, people, there were collector personas that would just, collect as much stuff as they could. And then there were people who were playing more of the game side and just seeing what different combinations and new genes that you could come by breeding together different cats together. So it was a collectible and it was a game, all sort of all at the same time. And I mean, our expectations were zero, right? Our expectations were that if we build something, we will learn something, and we didn't know what we were going to learn. We didn't really even, in a sense, understand what we were building, and it actually kind of took us a while and to sort of see how the users interacted with it to really understand sort of what we had created. And like I said, we learned like 3 valuable lessons that led to 3. I think incredible products, now 4 years later. But it was kind of what Axiom Zen did, right? Like we would try all sorts of crazy stuff. And of course, most of it didn't go anywhere. But that was how we learned. And so even if CryptoKitties hadn't taken off, we would have learned a ton and been able to try something else.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff. The thing that's on your website the saying on your website that I find fascinating is serious business of fun and games on the blockchain. So, you mentioned the first one was like, hey, we want to explore and learn. We didn't really have an intent, kind of like you said, you just wanted to explore and learn. And we joked about it. We joke about our company all the time. You can't learn anything by reading or watching. You got to do it. And then when you do it, you'll learn something. Right. And so now you've learned this information. You said it branched out 3 separate products, pretty fascinating stuff. But the like thesis or the ethos of Dapper, the serious business of fun and games on the blockchain. When did you know like that's the direction you were going to be? Because was it from the very beginning? Like we want to make games using blockchain. And then also I'd love to understand the why. Why did you feel like this was needed or necessary or going to be helpful to society to make games specifically using the blockchain? Because there's the naysayers or people that argue about this stuff often say, well, blockchain hasn't solved any problems. It doesn't have you're laughing, right? The naysayers say, but sure. I'd love to understand like kind of like the ethos of the spirit of the company and kind of understand the why behind it.
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the lessons that CryptoKitties taught us that didn't sort of lead directly to a product, but became very apparent as we, saw our players interacting with it was just that the games are just such a good vector for getting people to engage with new stuff. It's sort of an old saying, right? Like, all technology is used for games at some point, but, I think the psychology of that is pretty sound, right? Like, you have this new technology and it has new capabilities and you can either use it for something fun or you can use it for something serious, right? Like you could use it for something meaningless, but that's not very interesting, right? Yeah. And if you look at the serious side of it, right? Like serious things are serious. Like I don't want to take a risk with my life savings. I don't want to take a risk with my mortgage, with my insurance policy. All of these people, even my internet access, right? Like all of these people were saying, hey, technology, blockchain technology can remake these industries. And I believe it can.
Yeah.
But why would we trust this new technology that no one can understand? No one's going to figure it out. No one's going to read all these white papers, right? And so the way we get people to interact with this stuff and learn to trust it is by just letting them use it. And how do we get them to want to use it? Well, we find that part of their lives where they want something new, right? Where novelty is an advantage, but it's still meaningful to them. It's not something that doesn't matter to them, right? And so that's exactly entertainment. That is exactly games, right? It's meaningful to us. We care about it. Sometimes we care too much, right? Whether you're a sports fan or a video game player, right? Like we get over-invested sometimes. But that's fun. That's part of what the fun is. But we still seek novelty there. And it's okay for these things to be new. In fact, it's an advantage for these things to be new. And so, what is the reason why we take seriously the business of fun? It's because that's how we're going to get people to try this stuff out, right? There was a time when e-commerce on the internet was like, everyone knew that was a terrible idea, right?
It was like witchcraft. It was like witchcraft.
Yeah, putting your credit card into a website. Like, what are you nuts? Are you insane? Right. Yeah. And now this last year, like, I don't know. I can't think of the last time I bought anything that wasn't on the internet. And so it's just one of those things that like, and how did we do that? We didn't do that by having explainer videos about how DNS works and the format of TCP headers, right? We did that by, like creating Reddit and, and Twitter and, even like stuff like Congregate and online games, right? Like we got people into it having fun. And then once they used the technology and started to not understand it in the sense that like an academic can understand it and explain it, but understand it in the sense of getting a visceral sense of what its capabilities and limitations are and what you can and cannot trust, right? And eventually we figured it out. And like I said, now we all use e-commerce. So I think blockchain's the same way. We need to bring people in with stuff. And yeah, of course, there's some people who are willing to take a flyer on like finances and on all of this stuff. And that's fine. Like, I don't want to stop them. But for most of us, if we're going to try something new, we need to do it in a part of our lives that is it's a little less serious. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that as it's very difficult to trust something that is like has potential consequence if you're wrong. And when I remember the first time I heard smart contracts on the Ethereum network, I was thinking about, I was like, it removes like the arbiter. Right now we have like an arbiter that judges. So for example, if I was to buy a car from Dieter, I would have a bank that would pay you, then I would pay the bank. You give me the car. There's the triangle. And I remember the original blockchain videos would be like, well, we can remove the triangle. Like we can remove the bank. We'll just have the blockchain will know this. And I was like, but how does it know it gave me the car? Right. Like, I can see how the money went through, but what if I don't get a car? Or what if the car Dieter gives me is a lemon and I want to take it back and I want him to take it back? How do I issue a refund? And in all these cases, we use arbiters, we use judges, we use banks, we use somebody to figure this out. And so I remember thinking like, this makes no sense. What do you mean the blockchain is going to know the answer? That doesn't, like, the blockchain can't do anything. Right. And it's like, oh, these computers will know. And so I like the way you frame it. Like, hey, when it is like that, that is grave. It's hard to say I'm going to start buying cars on blockchain, but playing these games, I can see it. It just totally makes sense. Like, yeah, maybe I will buy a digital kitty and try to breed it. I don't know. When that first started going down, or when you guys first started planning the CryptoKitties, did Tamagotchi play a role in that at all? Because I remember when, I don't even know if you know what I'm talking about, those digital fobs.
Sure. I mean, lots of people reference Tamagotchi. They reference, Beanie Babies. We just wanted to create an experience that we thought was going to be fun. So, I suppose we could have leaned into the Tamagotchi analogy a little bit better and like made it so the cats, you feed the cats and all of this stuff. But one of the things that is like kind of mind blowing about the blockchain that has never been true in software before is that stuff just exists forever, right? Like when you build a thing, when you build a chair, right? Like so long as you keep it, out of the moisture and the fire, right? Like it'll last for, multiple lifetimes. We've never had that in the world of digital assets before, right? When I create something in World of Warcraft or whatever, like as soon as that company goes away, as soon as that game goes away, then all of the stuff in it goes away. CryptoKitties can live beyond that. And so the idea that, this is a very long-winded way of me saying that, well, we didn't want the idea that the kitties could die, because part of what's cool about blockchain is that these kitties are going to outlive all of us. Right. And so, and it's not very fun to have a game where you have to feed your cat, but not feeding it has no downsides, right? So, so Tamagotchi was, is a very distinctly a time-limited experience, right? No matter how good you are at taking care of your pet, it eventually dies and you start over again. And that's fine. That's that game, right?
Yeah.
And you could definitely build that game on the blockchain, and I think it would be interesting. But we wanted to go into this more like, you've got this, we wanted to lean into the endless nature of digital assets and how they can live, potentially outlive physical counterparts.
Yeah. And I'm curious, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. And I know this is not a technical perspective, but I'm just curious, since you have relationships or you've met people that are very into collect digital collectibles, right? Mm-hmm. NFTs. The way I described it to my son is, we saw a movie where like there was a heist movie, and they like stole a piece of art, and like some authenticator or whatever comes and checks it and like makes sure that that's real art. And I said, that's what NFTs are supposed to be. And they said, what do you mean? It's like, you can't rip them off. Like, you make whatever you put on the NFT network or a blockchain network, that item, it cannot be reversed. It cannot be duplicated. It cannot be engineered. It's like, it is that permanent thing. And instead of a person coming and authenticating it, all these computers agree to it. Right. Give us an idea of the mindset of the digital collector, because is it really, I'm curious about this, like, because I can see why once you know that it's authenticated, that makes it more appealing, right? I want that. No different from people who buy like first run Jordans and they never wear them, like they see them in their glass case. Like, I don't know, why do you have this shoe? It's like, no, it's in I want it. I guess no other reason than I want it. Is the mindset of a digital collector the same as an art collector, the same as, a person who collects hobby things, artifacts? It's just, there's just an intrinsic value. Is there like have you noticed any difference in the cultural phenomena of people that want to collect these things via NFT versus the physical world?
No, I mean, it taps into the same fundamental aspect of human nature, right? some of us are collectors. I'm not a huge collector. But I don't know. I think it makes sense, right? Like we have what we collect says something about us. And the friend of yours who wants those pristine Air Jordans, limited edition Air Jordans, and keeps them in the box. Like it's not a shoe. It's not a thing to keep your feet from getting cut when you walk down the street, or to let you jump a little higher, right?
Yeah, it's not for basketball. Like the guy will not wear them.
but it's an embodiment of that individual's attachment to the culture of basketball that led to the creation of that shoe in the first place.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I know, you tell me that your friend Jose, I know that your friend, right, their favorite sport isn't hockey. I know that already, right?
Right.
I know that your friend, right, is not somebody who, their greatest dream in life is to go to the Louvre, right? Like we know something about that person because they have chosen that thing. They have curated that aspect of their lives and said, look, this is what's important to me. And having an external physical embodiment of that, something that you can look at and say, that's mine. And it means something. And the fact that there is a limited edition of those is what is how I differentiate myself from all the other people who didn't go to the lengths that it took me to get this.
That's how fanatical I am. I will wait in line for the midnight drop, however they do it. I think they have like like they kind of just tell people it's being released tonight at these 5 stores, and people like rush to them. They can't wait to go.
Exactly. And that's how they want to see themselves. They want to be a part of that tribe. And they want to prove it to themselves. They want to prove it to their friends, to the world. And so, Jay Leno, why does he have all this? He can't drive all those cars, right?
Yeah, he's got a lot of cars.
But it's like, imagine the satisfaction he has knowing that he has what I assume is the world's greatest car collection. And so, we are not all Jay Leno, right? We all can't be have the world's greatest X collection, but we can all have the things that matter to us. And when you talk to the people who are, especially the ones coming from the physical collectible world, they're like, man, this hits all of the same buttons that physical collectibles do. And now I don't have to worry about water damage, about fire damage, about getting things authenticated, about knowing, their provenance, about knowing, whether or not, this is a trustworthy, issuer of collectibles, and they're not just going to print a million more of these, right? Like and the shipping time, right? Like imagine you want to collect this thing and you have to wait 2 weeks just to see it. And then you look at it for 2 minutes and then you have to put it in a box because you're afraid the UV is going to get to it. So it makes this stuff, it keeps all of the aspects that they love, which is, I know this thing is legitimate and I know that there's a limited number of these, and therefore this has the value of telling myself, the world, everyone, that I care about this thing to this extent, but it doesn't have all those issues that physical stuff does.
Yeah, and I can see exactly how the idea of original, not duplicated, uniqueness, and I don't know if I mentioned like the authentication of it, the fact that it's authenticated, like that is basically uniquely yours, can be very appealing to collectors. Talk a little bit about how did the pro sports league start getting involved? Because this is such new territory, like normally a lot of different, companies, I don't know if we think of sports teams as innovative, not innovative, embracing technology, not embracing technology. They're finally starting to embrace gambling, for example. But how did the partnership between the NBA, the UFC, how did that start happening? Did they knock on your door and say, hey, we want to make collectibles? Or because they obviously, sports memorabilia has a lot of collectibles, cards. We already talked about the shoes. Like the two are tied very closely together. How did that relationship begin? Did they reach out to you? Did you guys reach out to them? Whose idea was it to like, hey, let's take these moments in time and make them NFTs?
So I honestly don't know if NBA called us or we called them. We talked to so many IP holders in the first half of 2018. CryptoKitties came out. It was all over the news, and a lot of IP holders are like, look, that we understand that, right? We understand the collectibles market, and here is finally a credible way for there to be a digital version of that, right? And so we had a bunch of folks that called us, and of course, just a really large number of folks that were more than willing to answer the call when we reached out to them. The reason why we went with NBA, and you know, I don't want to brag, but like there was a long list of IP holders that were seriously interested in engaging with us. Was part of it was the sports collectible thing, right? Like sports collectibles are probably the biggest collectibles market, sort of outside of cars. But when we talked to the NBA, their team got it. Their team wasn't, oh, you made a bunch of money, we want to make a bunch of money too. Their team wasn't, hey, here's a new product line we can sell. Their team was saying, here is a way for our fans to engage with the sport that they love in a digital native way, that is going to make our fans happy, right? And yes, there's a business model around it and there's a revenue stream and all of that stuff. But like they were really committed to the idea that this was not something we were going to do in the next couple of years, that this was the beginning of a partnership between us that was going to last, 5-10 years, and that this was going to be the beginning of a new part of basketball culture. Now, we didn't know, they didn't know if it was going to be successful or not, but that's the mindset. That's what they wanted out of it, was for it to be another thing in the category of, special edition basketballs, jerseys, limited edition shoes. They felt like this could literally be something like that. And when we started showing them the visuals, like it, like imagine the first time they saw those cubes, right? And with the players in them, their team was just like ecstatic. And I think at that point in time, everyone knew that it was up to the fans, but if the fans accepted it made sense that this will legitimately be part of NBA fandom indefinitely at that point. And so I'm just really glad that we chose them as a partner, because I think, we could have done all sorts of other stuff, but a lot of teams, we weren't talking to the core team at the company. We were talking to a team whose job it was to monetize IP. And that was a big difference. And that was why we went ahead with NBA. I'm really excited. I think now that we've shown it, right? They had the vision to see it before we could show it to anybody. And now the other leagues are seeing what it looks like in action. And I'm looking really forward to seeing what we can do with other sports.
Yeah, I want to explain this to people who have no clue what we're talking about right now. So if anyone is listening and you have not visited NBA TopShot.com, go ahead and check it out, NBA TopShot.com. When Dieter talks about a cube, he's talking about a digital cube. It's like a graphic display. On one side, it looks like an image, or I know they can all be different. On one side, it can be an image. On another side, it can be a date, maybe a factoid. And then there's a highlight reel. And this highlight reel is, some of the big moments of big games of your favorite player, your favorite team, whatever the case may be. And when you buy it, it is yours forever. And are some of these, are they all single quantity, or some of them have multi-quantity, but there's only like 5? How does
they're all
work?
limited? They're all limited edition. So we have different tiers, right? So we have like the ultra rare tiers all the way down to common ones. But even the common ones will have, we do them in seasons, right? And then when the season is over, then we won't mint any more of those. And so they're all limited edition. Each of them is unique in that they have their own serial number. But it is, you and I might have both have moments with the same play in them. And maybe they're the same edition, so that they're the same except for the serial number, or maybe you have an ultra rare version of the same play that I have a more common version of, and obviously the rarity of yours would be greater. It's akin to a jersey or a sports card, right?
Sure.
In that, like, the jersey you have is in some ways similar to the jersey I have, but they are different. And, so in this case, we have a serial number to track them. And then the blockchain also lets us track the provenance of them. And so, there's a bunch of NBA players who have owned moments, and you can actually, in some cases, you can you can go and buy a moment that one of the NBA players has themselves owned at various times, and you can prove on chain that ownership happened and that was the one that they owned in the past.
No, it makes total sense. It's no different from game worn shoes. We use shoes as an analogy. Like, some of the shoes, if Shaq's actually worn them, well, they're more valuable. They're game worn.
Absolutely.
When I go through the current, the way it's set up, I'm assuming right out the gate, like, does the client, does the partner, does the NBA help predetermine some of the value of these moments? Because there are certain moments that are iconic in time. I don't know how big of a sports fan you are, but I'm guessing you definitely know a lot about the NBA now that these partnerships here, like Jordan's dunk from the foul line, or his legendary game-winning shot for, his 6th championship, where he kind of pushes off Byron Russell of the Jazz, or when Jordan shot it over Craig Elo and he does the jump pump fist. Or even I use Jordan because he's the most iconic figure probably in the world. His shoulder shrug, right? The moment after he hits all the threes against the Trailblazers, like pulls the shrug. That's an iconic moment. Did they already come in and say like, hey, these moments in time, by the way, we want to make them ultra rare? Because it seems to make sense. I'd love to who is determining rarity and importance and value of moment?
Yeah, so it's a partnership. So the league, they want control over the, and frankly, we want them to have control over the edit of the clip, right? So, So they come and they say to us, look, here is a clip, right? And I mean, you could say that the league tells us which ones are the most important ones or not, but we have people on our team who are giant basketball fans, and they're helping, right? So it's not like it's a surprise to anyone which of these things are sort of more significant than the others. Like, we need the NBA to tell us, but we have that conversation with them, right? So they'll come through and they'll say, okay, here's 100 new moments, right? And then our team will go through them, and it's up to us, though, to manage the economy, to make sure that the rare stay rare, to make sure that the commons are sufficiently common so that new players coming in have a chance of getting something interesting for themselves. And that's a balance we have to do. And that's the thing the NBA doesn't have any instincts on, right? Like, they can say this one should be rare and this one should be common, but they don't really have any experience in how rare should it be. And that's where our team comes in, right? We just hired a full-time economist. We have people who joined us back in the CryptoKitties days, gaming background, game designers, and the that team, then they're making those decisions about what does the community want, and what is going to maintain the sense that what we're doing here is correct. And that's it's witchcraft, I'll be honest, right? There is no right answer to that. There are a lot of wrong answers, right? But there is no sort of objective right answer. And so, it's just really smart people paying really close attention to what's happening in the market. We have amazing internal reports that these giant scatter plots talking about what trading action has had, and what does the trend look like over time, and how are people getting more excited about these kinds of moments and losing interest in those kinds of moments, and is that a fundamental change in how users think, or is that just that people are excited about this right now because of a news article, and that's just that the interest in that is going to rise again in time, right? And trying to balance all of that and make sure that we've got a good mix. If everything was just if every single NBA TopShot moment was these amazing game-winning dunks, that wouldn't, first of all, express the richness that is the game of basketball. Right. But it also just I think part of what makes those special moments special is that they are outstanding in what's happening, and so we have to make sure we're representing everything that happens. Even could be that your favorite player, had a funny little shot that not very many people noticed or not many people cared about, but that might be one of our moments. And so, you can imagine that the fans of that team or that player getting really excited about that moment, even if overall it's not sort of one of the biggest, the most exciting movers in the overall league.
Yeah, no, that's super fascinating stuff. I mean, I really appreciate you kind of sharing some of the psychosis behind the players, the technical aspects of it. I'd love to take it a little bit more to the technical side. So this what's interesting is TopShot. You mentioned earlier that to make more people accept it, you just like to make people accept websites. We didn't introduce like this is what a DNS is. This is what this is what JavaScript does. People used it, had a good experience. So I'm looking on NBA TopShot, and I don't see any mention of blockchain. Where I haven't found it yet. I'm just cursory looking at it. It doesn't say blockchain. It doesn't say like Flow Network. First of all, is it built on Flow Network? And I'm assuming that was a conscious decision to be like, hey, you don't necessarily need to know the technical ways this is being done. You just need to be able to trust it. Is that accurate?
That's exactly right. And it's, like we knew that, this phrase branding sort of, has like sort of a weird, dirty context. But the reality is that's one of the ways that we as humans sort of know what to trust, right? And so, what we wanted to do is we just wanted to build a trusted brand, and we didn't want people to have to understand a lot of complex stuff. It's all there. All the information is there. You want to dig into it. It exists, right? But you shouldn't have to understand that stuff. And we certainly don't want the tail wagging the dog, right? Like the blockchain is, I think it's a transformative technology, but it's an enabling technology. It's not built. It's not an end unto itself, right? It is a platform on which we can build things. And so, like the iPhone's interesting, but, Uber, Lyft, and Angry Birds are why it exists.
Yeah.
And so we just wanted to focus on that stuff. And the people who care about this, right? The people who either want to recreate their own experience, right? They want to create their own experience. They're like, man, I want to create something like TopShot. They're going to go figure that out. They're going to know what the fundamental technology it's built on is. The people who are just curious, they can figure it out as well. But if you're not that curious and you just want to come into it, we don't need to put that in your face.
And talk a little bit about what it meant to build Flow, right? So you mentioned earlier when we first started this conversation that you built CryptoKitties, it crashed the Ethereum network, and that's when you realized, hey, we need our own network. Like what was it about? And we're not trying to knock these other networks, but what was missing, and where did you see the opportunity? And I kind of want to understand a little for our audience to understand, like, what was the fundamental difference? Because there are more, let's say, blockchain tech. There's more currencies. There's more. This is the actual chain, right? Flow is a system of the chain. And so I'd love for you to explain what was missing and kind of how it got here.
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting one. When we started Dapper Labs, we knew we needed a different blockchain. We didn't think we were going to be the ones who had to build it. And I think any startup would tell you that, and certainly any investor would tell you, they certainly told us that trying to build 3 products at the same time is you're just asking for trouble at that point in time. But like, I took a team of 3 engineers, product manager, me. We did heavy research on all of the teams who were promising to build blockchains in the first half of 2018. Right, we went and we talked to all those people. Everyone was happy to talk to us. Right, CryptoKitties was the poster child for why we needed some sort of new scaling solution. And so we probably read 100 white papers, talked to 20 different teams or so. And in the end, we just the short version is that none of them were thinking about it from the standpoint of a consumer, and they weren't thinking about it from the standpoint of somebody building the application themselves. Mm-hmm. They were solving the problems of building a protocol, right? So I have a protocol idea and it needs to scale. How can I make it scale? How can I, increase that magic TPS number, transactions per second? And they sort of answered that question for themselves without asking what trade-offs they were putting onto the application developers, right? So broadly speaking, you could put all of the blockchains we looked at in 2018 into one of 3 buckets. The first bucket were blockchains that were just about money, right? There's a bunch of Bitcoin is obviously the most famous one, but there are other blockchains as well that are just about financial. We weren't interested in that. That's fine. Other people are. We wanted something that had smart contract capabilities. The second bucket of blockchains were those that decided that there was this idea of enough decentralization, that you didn't need to be that decentralized. Now, when people talk about decentralization, right, like it's like, why does it matter? And the thing that lots of people point to is the government. Like, well, we don't want the government controlling the blockchain. Yes, that is a concern, and certainly in certain use cases, in certain countries, I can see why that's a concern. But for me personally, it was much more about companies. I was worried about a company or set of companies figuring out, like, building this really valuable network and then figuring out how to extract rent from that, right? Like that's exactly what the business model of big companies is, right? How do I build something that is really useful to a lot of people and then jack the price on it and make sure that my profit margins are massive? I love my iPhone. I love that Apple built my iPhone, but Apple could literally sell iPhones for half the price and still be profitable, right?
Yeah, it's one of the bigger markups product. It's one of the bigger markup products. And I know there's a big fight right now over the iTunes margin that they're taking from developers. Exactly. I know Tim Sweeney, local to me in North Carolina, is very vocal. He's the founder of Epic Games. Like, hey, they are stealing from us because there's no way 30% of revenue is what it takes to operate the iTunes store.
Exactly. And so the idea that we would build this network and if it's, if it's everything we think it can be, and we can like have a whole new generation of software being built on this network, why do we think companies wouldn't figure out some way to capture that and engage in rent-seeking behavior on that? And so we knew that it was absolutely critical that we built it in a way that was truly decentralized. The third bucket of blockchains were those that understood that aspect of decentralization. They got it. And that's Ethereum is sort of the best example of that. Ethereum 2 is being built out now. And they basically said, well, we don't know how to make a blockchain faster and decentralized. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a network that's lots of little blockchains all talking to each other, right? And the terminology for this is sharding. And so, if one blockchain is not fast enough, well, how about 1,000 blockchains, right? We'll just make one blockchain that is one network that's actually 1,000 little blockchains, but they're all synchronized, right? They all talk to each other. The reason why that is difficult is, and honestly, the details get a little bit technical, but it's incredibly difficult to build applications on top of that because each shard can only directly interact with the state stored in that shard. And if there's any data that it needs in another shard, it has to wait to get that data. And so you end up with this scenario where something that on an unsharded network would be a single transaction actually ends up needing to be 5 transactions, 10 transactions, 20 transactions. And it just gets so much more complicated because you have to send a message over to that to the other shard to get some information from it. And then the information comes back and then you act on that information. But in the meantime, that shard's still moving forward. And so the information you have is stale. And so we have this thing called eventual consistency, which is not compatible with financial transactions because, I could check what your bank balance is on another shard. And by the time I get that information, maybe you've spent some of that money and now it's not safe for me to act on that. And so as an application developer, you can solve that, right? Like it is possible to build mechanisms that give you what we call atomicity, right? The ability for an all or nothing transaction to happen on a sharded database. But it's really, really hard. And I don't know, maybe I'm just like a little bit selfish, but as an application developer, I was like, why are you making me solve this problem? Like you solve this problem once for everybody. And that's in essence what Flow does, is it says, look, like we sort of slice the blockchain in a different direction, right? There was no question that we had to break the blockchain up into smaller parts, but instead of sort of breaking it into, I think of it as like vertical slices where all of these blockchains next to each other sort of with this communication layer, we broke it into horizontal slices. And we said, look, there's different jobs inside the blockchain. There's this job of there's 1 million transactions out there. Bring them all together, make sure they're valid, put them into lumps that we call collections. And it's more efficient to transfer a bunch of transactions all at once in a collection instead of, all of these little transactions. Let's make that a job. And we'll have a set of nodes that do nothing but that. Then there's this notion of consensus, right? Which is the heart of every blockchain, which is, what is the canonical chain? How do we decide what the official blockchain is going to be. So we have a set of nodes that do nothing but that. They don't have to worry about transactions. All that's taken care of by the collection nodes. They just have to build this chain that references those collections. Then the tricky one, right, is execution. We have all of these transactions, right? Thousands of transactions per second, tens of thousands of transactions per second. How do we push those through and do all of that computation together? And so that's the one place in our network where we create a sort of a narrow participation, where we say, look, we don't need, we can have a small number of really powerful computers doing this work, because the work we're giving them is what we call deterministic, right? It's math. We're asking them to add 2 + 2 together. And if they don't come back with 4, right, we don't have to vote. We don't have to have some sort of, mechanism of like, oh, gee, is 5 correct or is 4 correct? No, it's objectively true that 2 + 2 is 4. And so, yes, the computation they're doing is more complicated than that. But if they make a mistake, once somebody points to the mistake, then everyone knows what that mistake is, and we can punish those nodes. And so those nodes can't make a mistake without being caught. And so that's the one part of the network where we don't have to worry about having this massive amount of decentralization, and all the rest. And then we have thousands of nodes checking to make sure that those nodes are correct. So I went a little deep there, but the essence is that by building it more like an assembly line and having specialization in the different nodes rather than separating it into different shards or data regions, we were able to get really high performance without having to limit ourselves to just economic use cases, and without having to limit participation in the parts of the network where the security really comes from.
So, we're running, close to the top of the hour I have with you, but I got to ask you this question, as Dapper, you're there now, CTO, you're developing. So where will your time be spent going forward? Will it be to continue making the network as robust as possible? Will you be focusing more on new original games and titles using NFT? Will you be teaching other people how to develop on your network? Is that where your time and energy is going to spend? Or are you going to tell me you're doing all 3?
Well, as a company, we're doing it all, right? And so what my job is to find the people who can focus on each of those individual things, right? I'll be honest, I spend roughly half my time right now in interviews and talking to people, right? And finding these people who can be the leaders of these areas. And look, they're not going to come in and understand all this stuff on day one. But we've already seen, right, with our existing staff members, there are, I sort of was the lead architect of Flow in the beginning. And, a lot of the ideas from Flow came from me, or at least I was in the room when we were developing them. There are now people who joined the team since we launched Flow who know aspects of this network better than I ever will. And yeah, that wasn't day one, right, when they joined the team, but like after months, right, and lots of interaction and lots of conversations together, they understood how that one piece fit into the bigger whole, and now they have an understanding of that better than anyone else in the world. And we're just going to repeat that over and over and over again, right? And so we have a whole team that, to your point, right, is teaching other people how to build on Flow. I like to help with them a little bit, but at this point in time, the people on that team know more about building on Flow than I do. And the same thing with the consensus algorithm. I don't understand that as well as the team that's building the consensus stuff. The programming language, I don't understand it as well as the people who are building it and using it every day. And certainly the game stuff, right? Like, in early TopShot days, I helped a lot in terms of like how to structure this stuff. But now we've brought in people who, either because they have experience in the gaming community or in collectibles community, or just, big sports fan who sort of, first discovered this stuff through TopShot. They're because they can spend all day on that stuff. It doesn't, it takes a few months, but at that point in time, then they can know it better than any sort of generalist like myself. And so I become more of a coordinating force rather than an executing force.
So how about, what's your favorite thing to do though? of those three categories? Helping other people build, building flow, or building games?
My favorite thing is just finding clever solutions to interesting problems, right?
Yeah.
And flow has a ton of those, but games have a ton of those too, right? Like I built the genetic algorithm in CryptoKitties, and that was so much fun, right? Like that was a really challenging problem. It had to be able to run on the Ethereum blockchain, which is not very powerful as computers go, and but it had to be interesting enough to keep people engaged, and it did. And so that was a really interesting problem. When I look at some of the gaming ideas that the team has for going forward, I'm like, man, I wish I could spend time on that. I probably won't on those, but I think there are aspects of flow that I think it would be really fun to spend more time on. But more often than not, these days, when I am like, oh, I really want to engage on that thing, and I go and I talk to the team that's doing it, I very quickly realize that they're spending more time explaining things to me than I am giving them ideas that they didn't already have. And so it's become clear that that we've got the right people on board, and they know this stuff better than I do.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, Dieter, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. Super exciting industry. Like you said, we're all noobs, 2017, but you definitely know a lot more than most people. This is super fascinating. I also want to correct one thing because I did look it up. I do not own $3 of flow on Coinbase. I owe $3 something else on Coinbase. It's not currently tradable there, but when it does become available, this seems to me like a good bet to make. What you guys are doing are pretty exciting. And the fact that it's got scalable utility and use cases right out the gate, some big partnerships. I think you guys have a bright future ahead. Before you leave, though, it is time for the lightning round. The lightning round is brought to you by the Salesforce platform, the #1 cloud platform for digital transformation of every experience. Dieter, this is where we ask you questions not related to work, although somewhat related to work, so our audience can get to know you a little bit better. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Do you own NFTs yourself?
Absolutely. I own a few CryptoKitties. We actually made a rule that the team couldn't own CryptoKitties in the first year. And so I had to wait in order to buy mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have to buy it on the secondary market?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Of the things, you're a lot of you currently CryptoKitties, NBA TopShot, it's used in collectibles. Are you a collector outside of NFTs?
I'm not. I don't have much of a collection personality. I like to collect knowledge, right? I like to understand things, and so I'll go deep on a topic and learn, I don't know, basic electronics and how to build a simple circuit, or I'll binge a bunch of YouTube videos on how to grow dragon fruit. But that's I don't really have a super strong collector personality.
Fascinating. If you weren't in blockchain, what do you think? What else would you be doing?
Well, I mean, I spent most of my career building technology for Apple platforms because I think none of this technology matters if people can't use it. And Apple was, for a very, very long time, the sort of the company that got that the most. I think that's changed somewhat. But I'd probably still be a mobile developer, and almost certainly in some sort of consumer facing use case. Probably not games, but yeah, definitely technology. Probably mobile, almost certainly iPhone.
Sounds good. And then outside of work, give us an idea. You mentioned growing dragon fruit, so it sounds like you have a green thumb. What do you do for fun outside of work?
Well, I mean, there isn't a lot of outside of work these days. The advantage of a lot of people paying attention to the work you're doing is uptake of your products. The disadvantage is that things get very busy. I have a couple of kids. I love to spend time with them. We're a family that likes to go for walks. And yeah, I mean, I'm just really into botany these days. I'm not growing, like I don't have the time to actually grow a lot of stuff. But I've just been doing a lot of research into like different plants and stuff. And so I now know the names of, a bunch of different trees and shrubs and stuff all around our neighborhood. And it's something that we'll do with the family is we'll go out for a walk with the family and we'll research these plants and stuff that we come along that look interesting to us.
Well, listen, I don't know if you're into them, but as far as I know, aloe plants are very hard to kill. So they require almost no maintenance. If you get an aloe plant in your house, like it's going to live. I mean, that's the way mine are. So if you need some plants that you are like, tough because you can't give them enough attention, try aloe.
That's good advice. Succulents are very hardy.
Dieter, I want to thank you for joining us today on IT Visionaries. Thanks for running over with us a little bit. You're in a fascinating space. Thank you for telling us about the nature of collectibles, how you guys built this thing. And, obviously, I think it's very exciting times. I don't fully understand because I'm not a collector too, but I can recognize what the crowd is doing and they are into it. So therefore, this has a lot of legs. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, man. It was a real pleasure. Thanks so much.